From the land of 10,000 lakes, the largest lake in the world by surface area, but third largest by volume, this is Minnesota Unknown.
Each week, we'll take a deep dive into Minnesota's storied past, with a special emphasis on the surprising, the unusual, and little-known history hidden in plain sight. My name is Alex Weston.
I'm Hannah Norton.
I'm Josie Bergman.
And we are Minnesota Unknown.
All right, so last week we talked about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and that took place during a pretty big storm. Not only a really memorable shipwreck, but people would later call it the storm of the century. But you guys, in researching that, actually found another storm from much earlier that in its time, you said was actually considered the storm of the century.
Yeah, in fact, last week we talked about a boat that went down and claimed the lives of 29 sailors. This week we'll be talking about a storm that claimed 29 ships.
Oh, so many ships.
Yeah, and this is often called the Mataafa storm, or the Big Blow, or the Mataafa Blow, and it occurred on November 27th, 28th, and 29th of 1905, with most of the destruction occurring on the 28th.
It was very bold of them to claim the storm of the century in 1905.
Like they're just getting started.
No, I was looking through newspapers. You know, I found articles in like the 40s and 50s of people remembering this storm as the storm of the century.
Wow.
We should clarify, only people who were on the western end of Lake Superior thought of it as the storm of the century because that's where it was big. Other storms were much more destructive overall. So the most destructive storm in Great Lakes history is in 1913. But most of that, the worst parts of it were around Lake Huron. Whereas here, the North Shore of Minnesota and the northwestern bit of Wisconsin got the worst of it. So it was specifically people on our end of Lake Superior remembered this for decades as the storm to end all storms. To set the scene a little bit, in many ways, the turn of the 20th century was the golden age of shipwrecks on Lake Superior. Because, for one, there's so many ships going, a lot more than before. The Iron Range mines up in northern Minnesota are just cranking out iron, and it is the product the world wants at that moment.
So there's international demand for what Minnesota and the surrounding area is producing, especially around Lake Superior.
Correct. We need iron, and Minnesota's got it. And to get the iron across, it goes across the Great Lakes. And they don't have some of the things modern-day ships have. So there's no radar, there's no radio. So once you've left, you can't communicate with other ships. But then the other thing is you have the steamship. So sailing vessels couldn't just leave whenever they wanted to. Sometimes the winds just don't cooperate. And obviously sailors are very clever about angling the sails in different ways and using the wind to get where they want to go. But sometimes it's just not there. So there were actually certain times of years in the sailing days when ships would be able to leave from this port or that. And there were other times a year where it's like, yeah, we're not leaving because even if you do get out into sea, you're just going to get stranded. So the steamship changed all that. A steamboat can leave anytime. And the companies are like, great, now we don't have to wait for our shipping. We can just send out ships whenever, even if it's storming.
Do you think there's a difference in like when that kind of shift happens between the level of expertise expected of someone who knows how to man like a sailing vessel that has like sails versus just any idiot can drive a steamship? Do we think there was some of that?
100%. In fact, I'm glad you asked that question because it's a time when basically all the old guard sailors have quit or retired. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is they used to work for kind of individual small shipping companies and captains, and now these are all being gobbled up by huge conglomerates. And by 1905, nearly all the ships on the lakes are owned by U.S. Steel, basically, through the guys of the Pittsburgh Steamship Company, which was a subsidiary. And they are not willing to pay as much as the old sailors used to get. But the other thing is they've shifted from sailing vessels to steam vessels. And it's like any shift in technology, the old guard kind of miss out because they can't do the new thing. But also they thought of the new thing as like, yeah, we can train anyone to do this. And so for a variety of reasons, including firing a lot of the old people as part of union busting efforts, there were a lot of labor strife in this era. But the long and the short is the average age of a sailor at this time is like 18 or 19. And the average age of a captain is 32. And a lot of the captains are in their mid-20s. So these are very inexperienced guys. We talked about the Edmund Fitzgerald last week, and there's a crew and captain well-seasoned. The guys in 1905, they're all noobs. And the other thing that's happening that ends up being particularly dangerous in situations like this is you have all these old sailing vessels, and it's expensive to convert them all to steamships. So what they start doing is just using a steamship to tow a bunch of other old ships. And they call these barges. And so you're going to hear us talk about barges a lot in this episode. And I want to clarify, we live here in St. Paul and we see river barges, which are basically just a big flat box and it can't do anything on its own. It needs a tugboat. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about full vessels that can sail, but they're being towed by a steamship, because then we can leave whenever. We don't have to wait for the winds, and we haven't refitted this. And so you have ships that were built right at the end of the 1890s as sailing vessels still, and then they suddenly realized, oh, we can just tow them. So you would get sometimes ships that are 300 feet long, 400 feet long, and they're towing another ship that's 300 feet long. And sometimes towing another ship behind that. You would get these actual like ship trains.
Oh, like a ship conga line.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh. But the other reason that the companies like this is if a ship's being towed, you can have a minimal crew on it. So it's not empty. There are a crew over there, but you might have 30 guys on the ship that's doing the towing and then 11 guys on the other ship. So less people you have to pay, less union organizers. So you have a lot of ships towing other ships, and a ship that's being towed in this context is called a barge. So all the barges that we'll be talking about in this episode, they're proper ships. They could sail on their own and they have a crew. But in most cases, it's a skeleton crew because it's being towed and they can get away with it.
Yeah, what are the regulations like at this time? Is it just like, put however much iron you want on that boat and see what happens?
There's virtually no regulations.
Sick. And that always goes well.
Yeah. What's interesting, though, is there were a bunch of strikes and labor conflicts in Duluth in the summer of 1905. And the pressing issue there was a policy that the Pittsburgh Steamship Company had, which is if you were late in starting your scheduled voyage, you would be docked in pay for every hour that you're late. And so what that means is if you think, oh, the weather's a little bad, we should wait to see if this clears, you're losing pay. It often forced them into a situation where the sailors and the captains in particular are having to directly choose between safety and a dock in pay.
And that was regardless of weather or anything. It was just for any reason.
Yep. If you're late, you get docked in pay.
And that's fun because then you can just let all the guys on the boat fight with each other about it. And you don't have to be the bad guy because you're just like, well, those are the rules. I don't know. If you guys don't want to go out, like.
I mean, ultimately, it was the captain's decision. But yeah, the captain knows, like, my crew is not going to be happy if we're all taking a pay cut.
Yeah.
And of course, captains would stay back if they really thought, yeah, this is dangerous. But that incentive does kind of make you think like, it's not so bad. It's probably going to, I've been in worse. We can make it.
Yeah. Well, and if you've got this sick new steamboat, so you don't even have to worry about the wind, you can just
so that's the thing
through.
Is in the wind sailing days, you didn't leave during a storm. You just couldn't. If sailing ships got sunk, it was because they were already out on the seas or on the lake and a storm surprised them. It's not because they set out into a storm that they knew about. That's what changes this situation.
So everyone's towing barges. It's conga lines of ships as far as the eye can see. There's a warning out that there's going to be a storm and people are not listening to it. So 1905 had already been the deadliest and costliest season on record. A big storm hit November 24th. That took out some boats. That cost these companies a lot of money. So they're already running behind. They've lost money. They need to go. So on the 26th, iron mines are wrapping up for the season. On the day of the storm, there's 143,000 tons of iron ore being shipped. And this storm moving through is forecasted for the 26th and 27th and is said to be bringing fresh easterly winds.
They know it's coming their way.
Yeah, so there are reports coming in from the eastern lakes that reach Duluth saying that 4 barges have broken free from their tugs, and one of them, which was carrying lumber, broke up and slammed apart onto the rocks. Fortunately, no lives were lost. But it's not looking good on the 26th. And then on the 27th, the storm hits Duluth around 6 p.m., and the winds are reaching up to 44 miles per hour, and the wind chill is at like negative 50 degrees. Which is very cold. Most people, if you're listening to this, are probably from Minnesota and you've probably experienced some pretty low wind chills, but negative 50 is incredibly dangerous.
So that means it's not only just windy and raining, it's now snowing.
It's snowing heavily. In fact, it's like a complete whiteout condition. And this is, in fact, experienced by the rest of Minnesota as a blizzard and as a notable blizzard. Places were buried in snow. Streetcar systems stopped in Duluth because the trolleys are stuck in their tracks. Several trains across the state get stranded. There's telephone and telegraph wires going down. So this is a big storm. And We have this quote from the Duluth News-Tribune from the night of the 27th.
It is claimed by some of the old-time lakemen that the waves in the harbor were the highest seen for years, and this would indicate trouble for the boats caught on the passage. Night dispatcher McMillan of the Union Towing Co., who has been familiar with the lake for years, made the statement at a late hour last night that the harbor was the roughest he had ever seen, and from this he judged the lake outside might prove a record breaker in the point of rough water. So it's not looking promising. It's looking worse and worse.
It keeps getting worse. So by 3 a.m. the 28th, wind speeds are up to 68 miles per hour. We're at that estimated wind chill, negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And lake levels are high, about 2.3 feet above average. So there's storm warning flags flying that morning as the cyclone moves into southern Minnesota. And by 8 a.m., like Grand Forks, North Dakota, and St. Paul are recording blizzard conditions. So it doesn't seem like a great time to be on a boat. So there's a lot of ships that were scheduled to leave that choose to remain in the harbor, which means sailors are getting docked pay, but captains don't want to risk it.
No, that's crazy.
And to their credit, the captains are prioritizing safety over pay. But there were a whole bunch of boats that left just before the storm hit and hadn't heeded the predictions of what they were hearing about coming from the east.
So everyone back home is really glad that they decided to stay home.
I think so, especially after what eventually happens. And we've already spoiled it. 29 ships go down, resulting in a loss of 36 lives. In fact, one of the remarkable things is, given the number of ships that went down, how many people survived and were able to get rescued from these ships. But still, 29 ships. And we are not going to go through all 29. But we're going to go through what I think are the two most interesting, and both had lasting effects. So I said there's two shipwrecks. The first shipwreck I'm going to go into in detail involves two ships because of exactly what we mentioned with the barges and towing. So you had a ship called the William Edenborn, and it was towing a schooner called the Madeira as its barge. This was a steam-driven ship, and it's pulling a 3-masted sailing schooner called the Madeira. And the Madeira will be the one I'll eventually focus on, but they start their journey in tandem. Little side note, previously, the Madeira had been kind of infamous because in 1902, while it was sailing under its own power, it struck the international bridge at Sault Ste. Marie and jammed up the passage, which is like the critical passage, for like a week or so. So remember that boat that got stuck in the Suez Canal?
The Ever-Given!
This was like that. So the Madeira already has a bit of a reputation, and actually, it was at that point that they demoted it to being a barge.
It wasn't her fault.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's being towed by the William Edenborn. They are coming back from the east, and they are empty. They have some water for ballast, but they're relatively light. They're coming to Duluth to pick up more iron ore. And on November 26th, they're basically traveling with the storm, but they pass through the locks at Sault Ste. Marie and are headed towards Duluth. And by supper time on the 27th, the worst of the storm is caught up with them. They're reporting from supper time on the 27th for the next 12 hours straight, they didn't record a wind of less than 60 miles an hour, and it's often gusting up to 80 miles an hour.
I also want to put in really quick, just in terms of the wind. So I remember when I was a kid, we had like maybe 60, 70 mile per hour winds where I was, and my friends and I went out with our sleeping bags and like spread them like wings, and were like not like hanging in the air that long, but you could definitely like get blown over. And then I also remember from the Fitzgerald episode reading about how many miles of Lake Superior a wind coming across it would have to just build and build and build. So I can't imagine that kind of wind when it's had the time to ramp up power for just miles and miles of just blowing straight with nothing to break it.
Yeah, it's intense. And they realize we can't stay out in this. So they decide to head for shelter of a harbor that's at Devil's Island in the Apostle Islands. The captain knows this. It's a place where they should be protected from the winds a little bit. But they can't see anything, and they have trouble getting a compass bearing because the ship is being tossed so violently. So, a needle spins freely in a little compass, and the ship is being tossed back and forth that the needle will not stay put. So They have no trustworthy compass bearing. So they're just kind of guessing.
That's crazy.
And at 3:30 a.m., the crew hear what they thought sounded like a rifle firing. And they're trying to figure out what it was. Eventually, later, they figure out it was the cable snapping that connected their ship, the Edenborn, to the Madeira, which is being towed. And Edenborn, Captain A.J. Talbot later testified,
"I did not see my barge after it broke loose. In fact, I did not see it before it broke loose, the storm being so severe. The snow was so thick and so blinding we could not see half the length of our ship in any direction, and the sea piling over her stern in volumes of solid water.
So yeah, things are so bad they can't even see the rest of their ship, let alone the other ship that they're tugging. Later on the 28th, the crew suddenly see a dim outline approach through the snow. It's now daytime, and they realize it's the cliffs on the north shore of Minnesota, which means, one, they way overshot where they were trying for in the sort of safety of the Apostle Islands, which is on the north side of Wisconsin. But also, it's still very bad visibility. By the time you see the cliffs, it's almost too late to do anything. Mm-hmm. So what the captain actually does is they just suddenly pull the rudder hard to one side and the whole ship just shifts around. Because what they're thinking is, we're going to hit this cliff. If we hit it head on, we're just going to smash apart. If we sort of sidle up to it.
Tokyo drift right into it.
Yeah. So yeah, they Tokyo drift. They basically, this whole ship is just suddenly lurched about, and now it's coming parallel to the cliffs. And crew went on deck to observe. And at this point...
Again, it keeps coming up. These are the most Minnesotan experiences ever. It's like when there's a tornado and your dad goes out to look at it. Like, yeah. Well, I guess we all gotta go watch.
In this case, the captain orders them out to observe because he wants to know how close are we to the cliff. He needs visibility. He can't see, especially since he's just turned his ship. And at this point, unfortunately, this is where we get the only fatality on the Edenborn. James Johnson was third engineer, and he fell to his death when he stepped on a place where a hatch normally would be, but the hatch had been blown off by the storm. You know, he's looking at the cliffs, presumably, and he just steps into a hole and falls and dies. Ugh. What's particularly sad and ironic about this is this particular sailor, James Johnson, had been yelled at multiple times by the captain for stepping on the hatches. He's like, no, go around. It is not safe to step on the hatches. So, very sad. The rest of the crew does survive. They're at a part that is now part of Split Rock State Park. And if you're familiar with that, this is where the North Shore is at its cliffiest. Like, it's just straight vertical cliffs for much of this way. But they actually wash ashore relatively gently, quite luckily on a beach near the mouth of the Split Rock River. And the crew just hunker in and they're fine. But the Edenborn, I'm only talking about because it was tugging the Madeira, the barge. And now the Madeira is adrift, and this is where things are serious. So we'll back up a little bit to the Madeira. So, the Madeira, it's a sailing ship, no steam engine of its own. The cable has snapped from the ship that's tugging it. So they're just completely at the mercy of the waves. And what you do in this situation, the only thing they can do is drop anchor. Mm-hmm. And that's actually probably a good idea. It'll keep you in place. You'll get tossed about, but you can ride out the storm. So the captain and crew later reported that they dropped both their anchors, and for some reason the anchors didn't work. Now what's odd is, spoiler alert, this ship goes to the bottom of the lake, and in 1955 divers explored the wreck, and they found both anchors intact and on board. So we have no idea why. They apparently didn't drop anchors, but thought they did. So they're just getting tossed about. It's now middle of the day on the 28th, and it's whiteout conditions, but it's at least a bright whiteout. And suddenly they see a dark form looming, and again realize that's the cliffs of the North Shore of Minnesota. There's literally nothing they can do at this point. They smack right into the 75-foot near vertical cliffs at Gold Rock Point, which is right around the bend from where the Split Rock Lighthouse is.
Suddenly in the darkness, the ship struck, and the crew found looming up in front of them a sheer cliff so high that in the darkness and storm they could not see the top. In desperation, a line was cast to see if it would catch on something, but it was of no avail, and the barge would back up and then shoot against the cliff like an insane man trying to batter out his brains against a stone wall.
So that was from the Duluth Evening Herald. And so this boat, with each wave that comes in, the boat smacks the cliff, and then the waves pull it back out, and then it smacks the cliff and pulls it back out just again and again, and they begin to see cracks appearing. It is now the most desperate of times. They know that if they stay on this ship, the ship is going to get smashed, and they're going to go down with it. As crazy as it seems, they have to get off this ship, and the first guy to try is first mate John Merrow. And as the ship is going up towards the cliff, he sees that the mast swings almost to the cliff. And so he thinks, I'll climb to the top of the mast and then jump from the mast to the cliff. And he goes up to the top of the mast and is like, no, this isn't going to work. He starts climbing down. And as he's almost down, the mast snaps and he's just thrown into the sea. And he will end up being the only fatality of this ship, which is incredible when you consider the dire straits they're in. So now we get to the real hero of our story, Fred Benson. And we don't know a lot about him other than he was 17 years old and of Scandinavian descent. And we have this amazing account from the Duluth Evening Tribune, if one of you wants to read this.
Benson is a big, powerfully built Scandinavian with the arms and shoulders of a Hercules. He noticed just below the deck of the ship a small rock which might afford him a foothold so that he could get to the cliff just beyond. The ship was hammering out her life on this rock. Benson seized a coil of line and watched for the next time the ship should be jammed against this rock. When it did, he did not hesitate, nor did he impart his determination to anybody, but jumped and landed on his feet just as the sea and the ship receded. Then he had to hurry. He lost no time before the next sea came, but climbed as fast as possible, and when the next wave hit, clung to the face of the rock with the desperation of a dying man. When the sea went back again, he climbed, and when the next sea came along, clung for dear life. This system he followed until, almost totally exhausted, he reached the top. Then he dropped the line over the side of the cliff, weighted with rock, and with the assistance of this line, John Borkland, William Nyberg, and Arthur Jansen followed, and then these four set to work to rescue their comrades.
So, yeah, incredible. I think you'd have to be 17 to just physically do this.
That is such a 17-year-old thing to do, to watch a man fall off and go, I got it.
Yet only when you're at that age where you think that you're invincible would you even try something like this.
Yeah.
He basically jumps onto the cliff carrying a line and is able to climb the cliff. I said it's straight vertical, which it pretty much is, but there's enough crags and things that you can climb it. During a storm, not the best time to go rock climbing. He's presumably soaking wet and freezing.
Well, and it says the sea keeps coming, so he keeps getting doused by these waves and just holding on.
Exactly.
Because there's got to be ice buildup on that too.
Oh, for sure.
And then you're getting pummeled by huge waves. How would you even do that? That seems impossible.
So he climbs up 75 feet, and with this little cable, he's then able to kind of rig up a makeshift pulley and get a bigger, more strong cable set up, and he ties it to a tree at the top. So now this boat is getting smashed against the rock, but we have a lifeline, and the rest of the crew are able to, one by one, get up this line. And I forget how big the crew is, but it's like 10 or 11 guys. Somehow they get up this cable, and eventually the Madeira does completely split in two and sink. And what's cool is you can still see it today. It is under the water, and on a clear day, you can see it sitting right off of Gold Point.
And for all his heroics, what cool, awesome superhero name did they give to Benson?
Well, several of the later newspaper articles described him as the human squirrel.
Oh, Squirrel Boy.
Yeah. Now, they are not out of the storm yet. They're out of the boat, but it is still blizzarding. They will end up spending the next 40 hours in the wilderness in a blizzard.
Wow.
And they're soaking wet. Imagine going through all that and then realizing we're in the middle of nowhere. There is no road going there. There's no Highway 61 yet. They are in the absolute middle of nowhere. And after huddling in their snow cave for a bit, the captain decided that we are going to freeze to death if we just sit there. We need to keep moving. And so they just start walking. They don't know where they're going at all. They just start walking a direction in the woods, hoping to God they run into someone. And so after a 12-hour walk, they stumble upon a fishing shanty owned by a couple Norwegian fishermen, and they were able to shelter there until eventually the storm passed and rescuers came. Afterwards, the captain had portions of his feet amputated due to frostbite. Everybody got frostbite, but his was like amputation worthy. So
That's nuts.
They went through a lot. But incredibly, apart from the guy that climbed the mast, everybody survived.
I was so excited because I was like, oh, what a nice story. For everything they had going against them, we only lost one. But no, we actually have another thing.
We have another thing coming, yes. So we've saved the best for last. If you read accounts of this storm, it is called the Mataafa storm, and that is named after the SS Mataafa, another ship that gets wrecked. Now, a little bit of background on the Mataafa. It was built in 1899 as the SS Pennsylvania, but it gets sold to various companies, and eventually the Minnesota Steamship Company renames it the SS Mataafa, and that's Mataafa, which I was curious about that name, so I looked into it, because a lot of these, they have just sort of like boring white guy names, and you can assume usually that that's just a high up in the company.
And what you found is that that's the dad from The Lion King.
Yes.
That's it.
No, and it turns out she was named after Mataafa Iosefo, who was the paramount chief of Samoa and was one of 3 rival candidates for the kingship of Samoa. Why would they be naming a ship about this? Well, This is in the kind of height of colonialism, and Germany, Britain, and America are basically all wanting to build a naval base in Samoa, and they are basically intervening in what was essentially a civil war. Mataafa Iosefo was the guy America was backing in this fight. So I highlight this because it actually shows us just a little bit of what's going on in the world in 1905. This is during the Philippine-American War. The Spanish-American War has happened recently. We're sort of expanding our imperial reach, as are pretty much all the nations of Europe. And they're all building up these massive navies. And for that, you need a lot of steel. So there is a global angle to the shipping here. So I just thought that was interesting.
When they give ships boy names, they still call them ladies, though.
That's the interesting thing.
So that's interesting. It's almost like gender is not real.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to fast forward to November 27th, 1905 at 3:30 p.m. So this is a couple hours before the storm hits. The SS Mataafa leaves Duluth loaded with iron ore, and it's towing the barge James Naismith. Later, after all these ships sink, there's like an official investigation, so we get testimony from these guys. And the captain of the ship, Captain Richard Humble, would later testify.
The weather indications, however, were such that I did not deem it advisable to remain in port, and accordingly started down the lake. I used my own judgment, as I always do in such cases, and I thought it was safe to start out at the time.
So they've gotten the predictions that a storm is coming their way, but he, for whatever reason, thought it was actually safer to be out on the lake than in port. So they're headed east, and according to the captain, they were rounding the Apostle Islands when a nor'easter hit. And after hours of fighting the storm, he decided, we got to go back. So his first thought is, we'll have a safe port in Two Harbors, Minnesota. And so it takes them 5 more hours of struggling with the ship, but they make it to Two Harbors, and there is nowhere to land. The piers at Two Harbors have been completely wiped away by the storm. And he realizes, like, I cannot land here. So we're going to try for Duluth. Now, for those who haven't been to Duluth before, I'm going to describe where these boats are headed because it is very relevant to this story. Duluth, at this point, has built a harbor that is shielded from the lake itself and is accessible only by this little canal. So today, that canal is where the big iconic lift bridge is. There was a bridge there. It's not the lift bridge that's there today. It was actually a bridge that, like, it had sort of like gondola that would go back and forth.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like a sky trolley.
Like a sky trolley, yeah.
Where has the whimsy gone?
Where has the whimsy gone? But anyway, so there's this canal where you go from the lake into this safe harbor, this large area back there, and you are protected from the worst of the waves and things back there. So that's where all these ships want to get. And by the way, the Mataafa is hardly the only ship trying to get back. Basically, any ship that's caught in this storm and is near enough to Duluth, they're all headed back to harbor. But of course, they don't have radios, so they're not in contact with each other. They don't know how this is going. But when they get to Duluth, what they have to do is go between these 2 long piers. There are these long concrete piers that go out on either side of the canal. And today...
Is that the one with the lighthouse on the end of it?
The little lighthouse, yeah.
Sure.
And so there's the red one and the white one. I forget which is which, but at this time there was only one lighthouse. So there was one on the south side, but not on the north side at this point. But you know roughly where the canal is, at least. Mm-hmm. But you have to get through that. It's 245 feet wide and then through the canal. And it's not that long. And then once you're through, you're safe. But as you can imagine, if the seas are as rough as they are here, getting into this canal through those piers is going to be tricky. So they're trying to go for the harbor, and he realizes there's no way we're making it with the ship that we're towing. So they cut loose the Naismith.
Are they in communication with this ship, or are they just like, psych, we'll see you later?
They have a megaphone.
Oh,
which
good.
is not an amplifier. It's just a big cone.
Hey, guys, we're leaving you.
And presumably the other guys will figure it out. But yeah, I don't know if they communicated it, but they cut the ship that they're towing free. The James Naismith drops anchor, and they get tossed around a bunch, but they're fine.
I just want to rewind really quick, because I've just noticed in the notes. Alex, how did they refer to going between those 2 piers at the time?
Yeah, so going between the 2 piers, they called it shooting the chutes.
All right. I just thought that needed to be said.
And they can't safely shoot the chutes with the Naismith attached to them, so they cut them free. And the Naismith set anchor in Duluth about 600 yards out, and they end up being fine. Now, the Mataafa, on early afternoons, probably like 1 or 2 p.m., I couldn't find the exact time, they're trying to enter the canal. What they couldn't have known is they're not the first to make it here. There had already been 2 other ships arriving, and both had failed to enter the canal. At noon, the 363-foot steamer, the R.W. England, had tried to enter the canal, and it missed the opening and got caught in the waves and was tossed out onto sand just off of Park Point Beach, which is down the Wisconsin side a bit, I think. The harbor of Duluth, they have one life-saving crew, and they immediately go off to try to rescue the people of the RF England. And that's important because they're going to be still there when the Mataafa arrives. So there's no rescue crew here.
Okay, so they are occupied.
The England guys were fine. The ship washed up on a beach and they were okay. But I think the point where they washed up, it wasn't easily accessible at the time, so they still needed a boat to come get them.
Okay, so they're still exposed to the elements. They need to be rescued.
Yeah, there's still a really bad storm going on.
Yeah.
Next, the 478-foot steamer Isaac Elwood tries to enter, and as it does, it smashes into the North Pier. Then it bounces into the South Pier and starts taking on water and quickly sinks just off the end of the pier. So actually, when the Mataafa comes in and tries to enter this canal, what they don't know is directly under them is a ship that recently sank.
Oh my gosh. That's like when wagon trains would pass wagons along the Oregon Trail.
Now, in this case, the guys got into a lifeboat and they were able to make it to shore. So all the crew of the Isaac Elwood survived.
Okay, so the folks from the England are okay, but they need help getting back in. But the guys from the Elwood are fine. They've gotten back in.
Yep. But the point is trying to shoot the chutes, as they called it, during these incredibly choppy waves is proving difficult enough that 2 other ships have already been wrecked trying this.
It is interesting to note you have in here that the citizens of Duluth had just started massive bonfires all along the pier to help people see things.
Yeah, I mean,
that's pretty neat.
Duluth's entire economy revolves around, in some way, shipping. And so a lot of people know someone who's out there in this storm. Yeah. Everyone is concerned that these ships get back, and they can see out their window that you can't see anything. It's a whiteout condition. Well, so the people of Duluth built hundreds of bonfires to try to make this something you can see, and the entire concrete pier is just lined with fire. Wow. So you got to imagine that as just a dramatic sight.
But like, these are not safe conditions to be out on a pier or to be out and about at all. And so for people to be going out in that to light a fire that very well may never be seen or might get blown out immediately is pretty cool.
Yep. If you go down to the canal today, the area around it's called Canal Park. And today in Duluth, that is the prime touristy part. Back then, it was all like warehouses and bars and little crappy hotels that served sailors. So there's a lot of sailors there that just got off a ship, are about to ship out tomorrow, or, you know, there's a ton of people involved in this industry and they all kind of know each other. So they are very eager to help in any way they can. And the only thing they can do at this point is make sure that they can see where they're headed a little bit. So the Mataafa, they are trying to get to shoot the chutes.
You're shooting the chutes.
Yep. Canal is now all lit up. There's huge crowds there and they have these bonfires. And as the Mataafa is approaching the canal to get between the piers, it keeps getting pushed back because there's actually wind going from both directions and there's actually waves coming out of the canal. So Captain Humble decides to just gun it and he orders full steam ahead. And they go maximum speed forward into the canal. They make it about halfway between the twin concrete piers, and suddenly a huge wave comes from behind, from the lake, and it lifts the back of the boat out of the water, and the front completely, like the prow completely goes into the ground. Like it submerges in the water and hits the bottom of the lake. I mean, the canal is, all things considered, not that deep.
And that's a lot of force because you've got all that momentum, not just from the wave, but also like from the ship.
Yep.
And they're full steam ahead.
They're full steam ahead. And yeah, they get picked up. I mean, there's hundreds of people watching this. And they all describe the entire back half of the ship. So that's like 200 feet of ship sticking out at a 45-degree angle. Yes. The propellers spinning uselessly, and then the front half entirely out of sight under the waves. And then it drops back into the water and jumps up and slams the stern against the North Pier. That's the one that has no lighthouse on it. Mm-hmm. Right after this, they will build a lighthouse that's still there in response to this.
Sometimes I wish we were filming this because I wish that we could show a picture of my face when you just said that. Can you imagine being that close to it too? Like if you were one of the people on the pier? I mean, or God forbid, one of the sailors.
You can see why this storm got to be called the Mataafa storm and why this was so memorable for people that were around for decades. So it's hit one pier, the rudder tears off, and the water pulls her prow out towards the open lake, and then she smashes her stern, so the back, against the south pier. And at this point, the captain yells, drop anchors. They're just like, okay, we just need to stop getting thrashed around. But they're unable to before she grounds in the shallow water outside the North Pier.
Is she sideways then to the pier?
Yes, she's sideways to the pier now. And she runs aground about 100 feet off the North Pier and 700 feet from the beach and from any sort of help. It's close. Everyone can see the boat there, but it's far enough out that they can't get to it. And what's crazy is not only are there hundreds of people there, there's people with cameras. So we have dozens of photos of every stage of this collision. Wow. Unfortunately, we don't have one of the whole back half sticking out, but we have different stages of the sinking of the Mataafa. Wow. But it is now beached 100 feet from the pier. And at this time, there are 12 men in the bow and 12 in the stern. And again, there's no connection inside between the two. The only way to get from the back to the front is to go across the top. And right now, waves are just breaking over that top.
Just out of curiosity, but what's the temperature of the water?
I don't know, but it's got to be like...
It's got to be like 32 degrees max.
It's colder than any water you want to be in.
Okay, so I'm just reading on like a swimming website, basically. At 0 to 6 degrees Celsius, jumping in is likely to impair breathing in the uninitiated as breath comes in big jolting gasps and it feels like someone has clamped on an ice neck brace. Skin smarts and burns. It's winter swimming. Limbs become weak. 25 meters can be an achievement. So you lose control of your limbs. I guess when you hear that it's only 100 feet from the pier, it's kind of like, that's so close. It seems like it should be so easy and so tantalizingly close. But literally, even a second in that water, it could be enough to drown you because you kind of spontaneously start to take these uncontrollable breaths and your limbs start to spasm.
Yeah. And the waves are like 15, 20 feet tall. So, it's so close, but given everything, it's impossibly far.
Yep.
And now I have to describe the ship a little bit. If you've seen a Great Lakes freighter, you know that most of them, they're kind of very long and relatively skinny. And they have a sort of little house at the front and a little house at the back that sticks up. And then it's all just flat in the middle. This one only had a house in the front, so the pilot house. There were crew quarters and the mess hall and the engine room and things were in the back, in the stern, but they were all under the deck. And now water's just pouring over the deck. So the place where the 12 guys in the back are, water's flowing overhead. And it's presumed they're starting to fill. And in fact, eventually all 12 guys get up on top. They are all clinging to the smokestack, which is the only thing sticking up above the water. Then at 3:45 p.m., a visible break opens up in the middle. The ship starts to crack. And I want one of you to, as dramatically as possible, read this next quote from the Duluth News Tribune. This writer clearly wanted to be the next Herman Melville.
The next wall of water which broke over her at this point was dyed red with the iron ore which had formed her cargo, presenting the appearance as of a leviathan of the deep that had received a death wound and dyed the waters with its blood.
Soon the ship splits fully into two halves, though they remain connected by like a thread of steel. There's 12 guys on one side, 12 on the other. It's breaking apart. In the bow, the better positioned half, Captain Humble, he has his megaphone, and he's yelling to the people who are now up on the deck on the back half, but they can't hear each other. Then he tries to yell to the people on shore, and the crowd is now thousands.
Oh my gosh.
And all the people say that they can just barely make out that he is yelling something, but they can't hear what it is. And then Captain Humble, he takes out a sign and he writes on it with something and holds it up, and they can't make out what it is. And then he tosses it into the water and it floats towards them, but then sinks before it reaches. So Captain Humble survives. He later gives extensive testimony. I couldn't find anything of him saying what he wrote on that. I really want to know what he was trying to say, but
help.
This is in Minnesota. He wrote cold enough for you.
Cold enough for you?
He wrote, well, if it weren't for the wind.
Do you think that was the inspiration for the You Belong With Me Taylor Swift
I was
music video?
Thinking that.
Okay. The Duluth citizens on the pier held up a sign that said, "You okay?" And the captain of the ship held up a sign that said, tired of drama. That's what happened in my headcanon.
Al and I won't believe anything else because we don't know what that sign said.
It's true. Now, again, there is usually a rescue crew that is always around the canal area, but they're away. They're busy rescuing the sailors from the SS England, and they don't actually get back for several hours. Meanwhile, the crowds just grow and grow and grow. They start even more bonfires, and people start sending out rowboats to try to get to it, but nobody can. Like, every little rowboat that gets sent out gets immediately just blasted back to the shore.
So they do try.
They do try.
I didn't know that.
This gets written up in paper after paper, and all the newspapers report that the crowd grew to around 10,000. Now, I looked it up. That's around the entire population of Duluth at the time. I feel like that number is exaggerated. Like, I don't know who's counting this, but the point is there's massive crowds. The Duluth Evening Herald later says this about the crowd, and this is my favorite quote. And a curious crowd it was, this motley gathering. There were capitalists and horny-handed sons of toil, schoolgirls and wantons, sailors and landlubbers.
Every horny-handed son of toil in Duluth was down there.
Every horny-handed son and toil, schoolgirls and wantons.
I believe that.
They counted the wantons specifically. Yep.
So they're all watching this, but they can't do anything. And they can see the guys out there. They can see guys on deck in the back. So now the ship is breaking in two, and the stern is starting to sink deeper and deeper. So the 12 guys that are over there need to get off. And 4 of them, one by one, attempt to make it to the other side of the ship, basically running across as waves are crashing over and things. It's a distance of over 250 feet.
Jeez.
Amazingly, the first 3 make it. And the crowds are like cheering every time a guy makes it. You know, one guy makes it halfway and then a wave crashes and nobody can see him and they all think he died. And then he pops up again and everyone cheers. I mean, it is like high drama. And so 1, 2, 3 guys make it. And the ship is sinking more and more each time. It's not easy when the first guy goes across, but it's getting harder and harder. Mm-hmm. And the 4th guy, Thomas Woodgate, is swept away. And amazingly, given how cold and choppy this water is, he manages to swim back to the stern and get back on board.
Wow.
And 4 more try to jump across and are washed back. So these guys are super wet and they're stuck at the back. And the crowd is watching every bit of this. So the rescue crew returns about 7 p.m. and they try for 8 hours to reach the ship, but they can't get anywhere near it. And eventually the head of the rescue crew, it's now middle of the night, he concludes that this just isn't happening. The seas are too rough, the visibility are too poor, but more importantly, his crew is exhausted. He would later say, I'm going to lose my guys if I send them out one more time. They're physically exhausted. So he orders the crew to rest, and they will resume trying to rescue either when the waves get calmer or when dawn arrives, whichever comes first. And his crew protest. They're like, no, there is a man out there. We don't leave him there. We're going out. And so he lies to them. He says he could hear the captain yelling from his megaphone that all 24 crew members had made it to the bow and they were all safe and warm inside. And so that gets the crew to say, okay, we'll rest until morning.
Wow.
And he later says, like, he felt really bad about this, but he was saying, like, literally, we would have had more people dead. They've been going up and down the coast, rescuing different ships. Remember, 29 ships go down in this storm. We're only focusing on a couple of them.
I think that really just goes to show, though, the drive that they had, kind of like we talked about in the last episode, where it's kind of this agreement that, like, you will come out after each other.
Well, and it also is interesting because a realistic person knows the people in the aft are not going to make it.
Yes.
Or have already died.
Well, that's the other thing he says. So in reality, there's only 15 crew members in the bow, and there's 9 left in the aft. And he just assumes they're already dead, which they probably were. Because remember, wind chill is 50 below zero. These guys are on the deck. Waves are hitting them. So now there's 15 that are in the bow, and they are at least inside. The power has gone out in this boat long ago. There's no heat. There's no power. Eventually, they end up starting a fire in the captain's bathtub, and they're pulling boards out of the walls of the ship to find the thing, and they're just huddling around this, and they're in there for 13 hours, and they're still being buffeted about by the waves, like they're getting tossed. A lot of them have serious injuries after this. So the rescue crews arrive back at dawn at 7:30 a.m. The seas are still rough. They make attempt after attempt, and it takes them a few hours, but eventually they are able to get to the ship, and they bring the crew to shore. And again, there's thousands of people cheering, and they just like swarm. And the captain later complains that we almost were crushed by the crowds because everyone was like wanting to help, but actually there's a certain point at which crowds just themselves become dangerous.
Yep.
And it's impressive that these people are out there that long too, because again, 50-degree minus below wind chill, they are out there in a storm.
Yeah. Those horny-handed sons of soil.
Yeah. And so they're immediately given a shot of whiskey and a blanket and sent to the St. Louis hotel where they recover. And they are just hounded by reporters for the next week or so. None of them want to talk. They're just like, I've been through a lot. Can you just leave me alone? And the reporters are all like talking about like, we couldn't get a word out of them, but we kept trying. It's like, leave the guys alone.
Let them rest. Jeez.
You know, they do later all give accounts. There's a full investigation into this and everything. But yeah, they've been through a lot. And so they are rescued, and eventually the ship does fully sink and go to the bottom. It is refloated later that spring. They dredge it back up, And what's crazy is it gets put back together and repaired and it's good to go. And they don't even change the name of the ship, which I feel like you would if 9 guys died on it. But it was retired in 1964. So that's the story of the Mataafa. And basically because everyone was watching this thing, this comes to be called the Mataafa storm.
Right.
But again, there are 28 other ships that went down. We've only focused on a couple of the most dramatic. But the aftermath of this, the immediate aftermath is there's a lot of scrutiny on the Pittsburgh Steamship Company, and especially the fact that they are owned by the Steel Trust, which is at that time the largest corporation in the world and is just this huge monopoly gobbling up everything. And they had this policy of docking people's pay if they didn't go out, and a lot of people are blaming them for that. And the company blames the lack of lighthouses. And they basically say, like, the government needs to build more lighthouses. So eventually Congress allocates over $3 million to build a bunch more lighthouses, which is great. But it's just interesting how the company is like, yeah, it's the government should pay for this. We're not at fault here at all. Also, most of the sailors that were out that night never sailed again because they had lifelong injuries. I'm talking about boats that didn't sink. Everybody was just thrashed around so much. They had neck problems and back problems and things.
And frostbite.
Yeah.
Probably.
And we actually know a lot of this because a lot of these guys, remember, they're mostly young guys.
Yeah.
So they're around when the draft in World War I comes about. And some historians have looked through their medical records from their World War I draft notice. And most of them get medical exemptions because of injuries from this storm.
Wow. That's some clever research right
Exactly.
there.
Now, the positive things that came out of this, a bunch of lighthouses did get built, and that undoubtedly helped. Most notably, Split Rock Lighthouse, which is just around the corner from where the Madeira crashed. That lighthouse was built directly as a result of the storm, as were several other lighthouses. But then perhaps the most enduring legacy is this is credited as being the storm that made a lot of people finally start paying attention to the weather reports. So the Weather Service was around now, but sailors would just sort of dismiss it, be like, whatever, we know better. One of the things that's significant about this storm is it was predicted by the National Weather Service. They were predicting storms at a level saying, like, maybe you shouldn't sail out here. And a bunch of ships went sailing anyway, and 29 of them sunk. And actually, Congress increases the Weather Service's funding after this. This was seen as a big success for the Weather Service.
And a huge success for the Squirrel Boy.
So that is the story of the Mataafa storm.
Till next time, stay squirrely.
And that's it for this episode. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into Minnesota's storied past. If you're in the Twin Cities and listening around the time this came out, tickets are on sale right now for our December walking tour, A Cathedral Hill Christmas. This will be a tour of the historic Summit Avenue and Cathedral Hill district of St. Paul. We'll be walking along the longest intact stretch of Victorian mansions in the nation and sharing stories from holidays past. We'll get to know the people who lived and worked in Summit Avenue and Cathedral Hill, from society ladies planning lavish Christmas parties to the servants whose hard work made their gilded lifestyle possible. This 60-minute tour will also explore the Victorian origins of some of our most popular holiday traditions. Bring the whole family, get in the holiday spirit, and enjoy one of the most scenic areas in the Twin Cities. Tickets are just $30 for adults, $20 for ages 6 to 17, and 5 and under are free. If you book before December 7th, you'll receive an additional $5 off each ticket. To learn more or book tickets, visit MinnesotaUnknown.com. Thanks again for listening to our podcast. You can find detailed show notes for this and all episodes at MinnesotaUnknown.com/podcast. We'll post a link there to each episode along with features such as accompanying images, links to bonus info, and lists of the sources we cited. If you have questions, comments, corrections, complaints, or compliments, or would like to suggest a topic for a future podcast episode, please email us at info@MinnesotaUnknown.com. We'd truly love to hear from you. You can find Minnesota Unknown wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss an episode. And if you have a moment to rate and review, that would really help others find us. Minnesota Unknown is produced, hosted, written, and researched by Hannah Norton, Josie Bergman, and myself, Alex Weston. This episode was edited by me. Our theme song is by Union Shakedown. This episode is copyright 2025 by Minnesota Unknown, LLC. All rights reserved.
Do you think when he was back, he ever, sidled up to the bar and saw a cute girl sitting there and was like, hey, what's up? They call me the human squirrel.
They call me the human squirrel. Would you like to see my nuts?
And Alex says my jokes are too inappropriate for the pod.
Yeah, that one's not making it in.
No, that one. I hate all of this podcast. I'm not cutting that. You can leave that in.